Dean Martin said 7 words to Elvis Presley in a dressing room at the Sands Hotel that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "You're killing yourself, and you know it." It was February 1970, 2 o'clock in the morning. Elvis had been sitting in the dark corner of the Sands showroom for 90 minutes, watching a man do something he didn't understand, perform without bleeding. Now he stood in the doorway of that man's dressing room, still wearing the dark glasses he used when he wanted to be invisible. And Dean Martin was looking at him with an expression that held no worship, no excitement, no indication that Elvis Presley's presence was anything remarkable, just recognition. One tired man seeing another. 3 hours earlier, Elvis had finished his second show of the night at the International Hotel. 2,000 people screaming, standing ovations that came so predictably they'd lost all meaning. The white jumpsuit soaked through with sweat, weighing 30 pounds by the end. The rhinestones catching the light and transforming him into something more than human, while the man inside felt less than human with every passing show. He'd changed into ordinary clothes, dark slacks, a high-collared shirt, the sunglasses, and done something he almost never did. He'd gone out alone. No entourage, no Memphis Mafia, no handlers or bodyguards or any of the machinery that usually surrounded him. He needed to see Dean Martin perform. He couldn't explain why. Some instinct, some hunger for something he couldn't name. Dean Martin was part of the old guard, the Rat Pack, the crooners, the generation of entertainers that Elvis had supposedly replaced. They'd met briefly at industry events, the kind of encounters where famous people exchanged pleasantries without actually connecting. But Elvis had been thinking about Dean Martin for weeks. Specifically, he'd been thinking about how Dean Martin always looked like he was having fun. The maitre d' at the Sands recognized him instantly, but read something in his face that made him lead Elvis to a back table without announcement. A seat in the shadows, a place where the most famous man in America could disappear for 1 hour. And then Dean Martin walked onto that stage, and Elvis felt something crack inside his chest. The contrast was devastating. Where Elvis's shows were wars, the band attacking, the backup singers assaulting, the audience driven to hysteria by sheer force of will, Dean Martin stood at a microphone with a glass in his hand, looking like a man who had wandered in by accident and decided to stay because leaving seemed like too much effort. He sang, "Everybody Loves Somebody." His voice was smooth, effortless, almost indifferent. He told jokes between songs, self-deprecating, slightly off-color, timed so perfectly they seemed unrehearsed. He forgot lyrics and laughed about forgetting them. He took requests and pretended he'd never heard of the songs. The audience loved him. But they weren't screaming. They weren't rushing the stage. They weren't treating him like a god who might vanish if they didn't worship hard enough. They were just enjoying themselves. Elvis sat in his dark corner and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Envy, so pure it was almost grief. Not of the fame. Elvis had more fame than Dean Martin could imagine. Not of the talent. Elvis knew his own voice, knew what it could do. What he envied was simpler and more devastating. He envied the peace. Dean Martin looked peaceful. He looked like a man who had made some arrangement with fame, some bargain that allowed him to inhabit it without being consumed. He looked like someone who had found a way to perform without disappearing into the performance. Elvis hadn't felt peace in years. Every show was survival. Every audience was a jury. Every night, he carried the weight of everyone's expectations. The band, the colonel, the fans, the legend that had grown so large he couldn't see around it anymore. When the show ended, Elvis should have left. He had early meetings. The machinery of being Elvis Presley would start grinding again in hours, whether he was ready or not. Instead, he walked backstage. The security guard recognized him. But something in Elvis's demeanor, the absence of entourage, the unusual quietness, made him step aside without fuss. "Mr. Martin's dressing room is third on the left. I'll let him know." "Don't. I'll knock myself." He stood outside that door for a long moment, not knowing what he'd come to say. Then he knocked. "Yeah?" He opened the door. Dean Martin's dressing room was small. A mirror surrounded by lights, a worn couch, A rack of suits, not jumpsuits. The kind of clothes a man might wear to dinner. Dean was sitting at the mirror, wiping makeup from his face. He looked up. His expression didn't change. Elvis, heard you might be in the audience tonight. You heard? Word gets around. Dean turned back to the mirror. Sit if you want. Bourbon on the table. Might be empty. Elvis didn't sit. He stood just inside the doorway, feeling suddenly foolish. I watched your show, he said finally. What'd you think? I think you make it look easy. Dean laughed. Short, genuine. No mockery. That's the trick, isn't it? Making it look easy. If they knew how hard it was, they wouldn't pay to see it. Is it hard? Dean stopped wiping his face. He turned to look at Elvis directly. The casual mask slipped slightly. Every night, every single night, I walk out there thinking, maybe tonight they won't laugh. Maybe they'll realize I'm just a guy from Steubenville, Ohio, who got lucky. Then I remember, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what they see. So I show them a guy who doesn't care, and they love that guy. This wasn't what Elvis expected. He'd expected confirmation that Dean had found some secret to surviving fame. How do you do it? Elvis asked. Pretend not to care? I drink. The words hung in the air. Dean's voice had an edge now. Not on stage. That's apple juice in the glass. Always has been. But after? To get through the night? To stop thinking about everything that could go wrong? He stood and walked to a small table, pouring bourbon into 2 glasses without asking. Yeah, I drink. Not healthy, but it's a solution. He handed Elvis a glass. You know the difference between you and me. You mean it. Every time you walk out there, you mean it. You throw everything you have at them like your life depends on it. Doesn't yours? Dean shook his head slowly. Not anymore. Maybe when I was younger, but I figured out that audiences don't want me to need them. They want me to not need them. They want to be the ones doing the wanting. He took a long drink. You can't survive this business if you mean it every time. Not the way you do. It'll eat you alive. You've got to hold something back. Something just for you. Something they can't have. Elvis finally sat. The couch was worn but comfortable. I don't know how, he said quietly. I've been doing this since I was 19. I don't know any other way. Dean studied him with something that looked like genuine concern. You're killing yourself, he said. Not literally, not yet, but every night you give everything. You leave a piece behind. One day you'll walk onto that stage, and there won't be anything left. Then what? Elvis couldn't answer. He'd been asking himself the same question for years. I watched you tonight, he said, changing the subject. The audience loved you, but they weren't desperate. They weren't reaching for you like you were the last life raft on a sinking ship. No, they weren't. Doesn't that bother you? Dean finished his bourbon. It used to. When I was younger, I wanted what you have. The screaming, the hysteria, them treating me like a god. I thought that was success. What changed? I got older, got tired. Dean leaned forward, his voice dropping, and I realized something that took 20 years. The screaming, the hysteria, that's not love, that's need. And need is exhausting, for them and for you. What I have, the laughter, the comfortable appreciation, that's actually closer to love than anything you're getting every night. Elvis sat with that. The dressing room was quiet. I don't know how to be comfortable, he admitted. When I walk out there, I feel like I'm fighting for my life, every single time. I know. And that's why they love you the way they do. They can feel you fighting. They can feel how much you need them to love you back. Dean paused. But Elvis, you've got to find something else. Something outside that stage. Because this thing we do, it'll take everything if you let it. Then you'll have nothing left for yourself. Nothing for the people who actually know you. Nothing for the life you could be living when you're not Elvis Presley. Do you have that? Something outside? Dean smiled. But there was sadness in it. 7 kids. Golf. The TV show. A nice house where nobody expects me to be Dean Martin. Some days it helps. Reminds me I existed before this, and I'll exist after. That Dean Martin the performer is just a job. Not who I am, just what I do. Elvis thought about Graceland, less a home than a headquarters, constantly filled with people who wanted something, about his failing marriage, about Lisa Marie, who would grow up knowing Elvis Presley the legend better than Elvis Presley the father. He didn't have anything outside the stage. He had built his entire life around being Elvis Presley, and Elvis Presley had consumed everything else. "I don't know if I can change," Elvis said. "I don't know if I can hold back. Maybe you can't. Maybe that's not who you are. But if that's the case," Dean looked directly into his eyes, "then you've got to accept what that means. Accept that this thing is going to take everything. And decide if that's okay. If giving everything to them, leaving nothing for yourself is worth whatever they give you in return." The clock showed nearly 1. Elvis had been here almost an hour. Dean stood and stretched. "I've got to get home. The wife worries." Elvis stood too. He set down the bourbon. Still full, untouched. "Thank you," he said, "for being honest. People aren't usually honest with me." "You want real advice?" "Yes. Stop trying to make them love you. They already love you. They loved you the minute you walked out in 1954 and did something nobody had ever seen. You don't have to earn it every night. You don't have to prove it every show." He walked to the door and held it open. "And find something that's just for you. Something they can't touch. Something that makes you happy when the lights are off and the crowds are gone. Because that's where life actually happens. Not under the spotlight. In the quiet moments between." They walked down the hallway together. Dean toward his family, Elvis toward the limousine that would take him back to the machinery. At the stage door, they shook hands. "Come to one of my shows sometime," Elvis said. "See what you're not missing." Dean laughed. "I have. More than once. You're incredible. That's not flattery. That's fact. What you do, nobody else can do. I just hope you're still doing it in 20 years. I hope you find a way to last." Then he was gone, walking toward his car, disappearing into the ordinary night. Elvis stood at the stage door for a long time. There was no secret, just a choice. Give everything and accept the consequences, or hold something back and live with what that cost. Dean had chosen to hold back. Elvis didn't know if he could make the same choice. The giving was all he knew. In the years that followed, people who knew Elvis noticed something different. Not dramatic. He still threw himself into every performance. But there were moments when he would stop between songs and talk to the audience like friends. Moments when he would mess up and laugh at himself. Moments when the intensity softened into something closer to what Dean had described. He never fully made the transition. The giving was too deep in him, but he tried. The gospel sessions late at night, singing for no one but himself. Those became more frequent. The quiet moments with his daughter. He protected those more fiercely. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. But Dean Martin had given Elvis Presley permission to want something more than the stage could offer. When Elvis died in 1977, Dean was asked for comment. He declined publicly, but his family later found a photograph tucked into his effects. Dean and Elvis backstage at the Sands. Someone had written on the back, in Dean's handwriting, "The night I tried to save him, or maybe the night I understood I couldn't." That's the story. Not salvation. Not transformation. Just one night when two tired men told each other the truth about what fame cost them. Dean found a way to survive. Elvis found a way to burn. Both were right. Both paid the price. And in that dressing room, for 1 hour, they gave each other the only gift performers can truly exchange: honesty about what this life takes, and permission to want something more.